Every 4 minutes, a high horsepower tractor rolls off a production line in Weifang, China. The factory covers about 52 hectares, roughly 70 football pitches. Its owner, a Chinese company called Weichai Lovol, says it can produce more than 100,000 tractors a year in a horsepower range running from around 50 all the way up to about 500. And this factory opened at an almost perfect moment, because on the other side of the world, demand for the giant machines John Deere built its reputation on was collapsing. In 2025, U.S. four-wheel drive tractor sales fell about 42% for the year. Combine sales fell 36%. The main U.S. Industry Association describes the current cycle in high horsepower agricultural equipment as running near its weakest levels since the early 1990s. A year after Lovol opened its plant, Deere's Production and Precision Agriculture division, the crown jewel of the company, was still down another 14% in a single quarter. So the entire Western large tractor cycle is in one of the sharpest downturns in a generation. Deere, CNH, and Agco have all cut production and slowed shipments to dealers to weather the contraction. Analysts are looking at the current data and warning that even a recovery in 2026 or 2027 may not restore the pre-2023 volumes many of the OEMs had built their capacity around. And China's biggest tractor manufacturer just opened what it calls the first smart factory in China's agricultural machinery industry, designed from scratch to build serious tractors at a scale nobody else in the industry is even attempting. Let me be clear about one thing before we go further. Lovol is not about to take John Deere's American farms tomorrow. Not yet. That is not the story. What is changing is the class of machine China is now able to sell and where it is starting to sell it. For most of the last 20 years, Chinese tractor in a Western market meant a small, low horsepower machine for a hobby farm or a small holding. That is not what Weifang is designed to build. The machines coming off that line are in the mid to large field tractor class, and the ones going to Europe next are aimed at the same farmers who currently buy from Deere and Fendt. To see why that matters, you have to look at what is actually being built at Weifang. The instinct with any Chinese factory story is to assume the machines coming out are small, cheap, and aimed at the low end of the market. That is not what is happening here. The Weifang plant is specifically designed for high horsepower tractors, 100 horsepower and up. The flagship model, the P7240, is a 240 horsepower tractor with a continuously variable transmission, CVT, the same kind of premium powertrain that sits inside John Deere's mid to large field tractors and inside Fendt's most advanced European machines. It runs on a Weichai WP7 engine, and it supports autonomous operation when paired with Lovol's own precision farming system. CVT is worth pausing on. It is one of the technologies that historically defined the line between a serious farm tractor and a value tier 1. A continuously variable transmission lets the tractor match its speed and load infinitely across the working range without stepped gear shifts. That means smoother fieldwork, better fuel efficiency, and more consistent output from implements that depend on precise ground speed. CVTs are expensive to design, expensive to build, and until recently, the domain of a small number of European and Japanese suppliers. Lovol building a proprietary CVT in-house. One Chinese competitors like YTO and Zoomline are also now investing heavily in, is a signal about where this industry is going. Above the P7240, Lovol is developing the P9000 series. Trade press reports a 4-tracked version rumored to peak at around 500 horsepower. When those numbers show up on a spec sheet, you are no longer talking about a subcompact export tractor for Africa or Central Asia. You are talking about the same class of machine John Deere builds in Waterloo, Iowa. The same class of machine CNH builds in Racine, Wisconsin. The same class of machine European arable farmers buy from Fendt and Massey Ferguson. Lovol has been explicit about what this factory is designed to do. The line runs on 5G, an integrated industrial internet platform, and end-to-end automation. Every stage, machining, painting, assembly, final inspection, is centrally coordinated by software. Robots handle a large share of the physical work. Cost per unit falls. Production speed climbs. Every 4 minutes, a finished machine. The company spent an estimated $420 million to build it. That is a very specific bet. And to understand why the timing matters, you have to look at what is happening to the incumbents. John Deere is not just any farm equipment maker. It is the biggest one on earth. Its production and precision agriculture division, the big combines, the big tractors, the precision farming systems, is the crown jewel of the company. It is where Deere makes most of its profit. That division is in the middle of a serious cyclical downturn. For the full 2025 calendar year, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers reported that U.S. four-wheel drive tractor sales fell nearly 42%. Combine sales fell 36%. Those are not adjustments or forecasts. Those are one of the sharpest large equipment pullbacks in modern American farming history. AEM's own read on the current cycle puts high horsepower agricultural equipment demand at its weakest levels since the early 1990s. Deere's own numbers have followed the same pattern. Its production and precision agriculture division was down 14% in its most recent reported quarter, and operating profit in the segment has fallen sharply from its 2023 peak. The reasons are relatively specific and worth naming. The single biggest one is row crop economics. Corn, soybean, and wheat prices came off their historic 2022 highs and have stayed off. That directly hit the profit margins of exactly the farmers who buy the biggest tractors and combines the arable operators running thousands of acres of grain. Interest rates stayed high for most of that period, which made financing a new $400,000 tractor meaningfully more expensive than it had been 2 years earlier. Farmers who had upgraded their fleets during the 2021 to 2022 boom decided to stretch the life of the machines they already owned rather than trade in. Used equipment inventories at dealerships climbed, which put further pressure on resale values and made new purchases even less attractive. Deere's response has been disciplined. Cut production. Cut dealer inventories. Take the pain now, so the eventual recovery is cleaner. CNH, the maker of Case IH and New Holland, has done the same. So has Agco. All three of the Western agricultural equipment giants slowed their factories, expecting the market to eventually come back. Across that same window, Lovol was accelerating in the opposite direction. Lovol was not always in this position. The company was founded in 1998 as the agricultural arm of a larger Chinese vehicle group. For most of its first 2 decades, it was one of many mid-sized Chinese tractor makers competing on price in a domestic market dominated by state-owned incumbents and Western imports. 2 things changed. The first was the parent company structure. In January 2021, Lovol was strategically reorganized under Weichai Group, a state-controlled conglomerate best known for building some of China's largest heavy-duty diesel engines. Weichai is not a tractor company. It is a powertrain company with revenues in the tens of billions of dollars and a serious industrial footprint in diesel engines, transmissions, and hydraulics, including the Kion Group, one of the world's largest forklift makers, which Weichai has held a major stake in for over a decade. Bringing Lovol inside that structure gave Lovol something almost none of its Chinese competitors had: vertical integration into powertrain. Its engines came from inside the same corporate family. Its transmission technology development sat inside the same corporate family. When the P7240 rolls off the Weifang line, it runs a Weichai WP7 engine. That is the same kind of engine plus tractor integration that historically gave John Deere its engineering advantage, building the engine and the machine together so both are tuned for each other. The second was scale. China also supported machinery demand through enormous purchase subsidy programs. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers has reported central subsidies for agricultural machinery purchases and applications running at roughly 24.6 billion yuan in 2024, around $3.4 billion. Those subsidies do not go to manufacturers. They go to farmers, who can claim back a substantial share of the price of a qualifying tractor. The effect is straightforward. The Chinese domestic market becomes much larger than it otherwise would be, and manufacturers like Lovol get a very large home customer base on which to scale production, iterate designs, and fund the research and development that pushes them toward higher horsepower categories. By 2025, the results were showing up in the numbers. Lovol itself estimates it accounted for around 30% of the roughly 370,000 tractors sold in China in 2025, the world's largest single tractor market. It was the #1 Chinese seller of tractors, wheat harvesters, corn harvesters, and peanut harvesters. Its 2024 revenue was 17.4 billion yuan. It sold into more than 120 countries. In Russia, it held roughly a quarter of the market. That last figure is worth pausing on. Russia is not a small tractor market. It is one of the largest grain-producing economies on Earth. Holding a quarter of it means Lovol is not just showing up at trade shows. It is genuinely serving field-scale arable farms at meaningful volume, and it has been doing that quietly for years. The domestic Chinese tractor market itself was down about 38% in the first half of 2025. Consolidation was hitting everyone. But Lovol was gaining share as smaller Chinese competitors dropped out. When a market shrinks that fast, the strongest players emerge structurally stronger. That is exactly what happened here. If you've watched Chinese industrial policy over the last decade, you have seen this exact pattern before. In construction equipment, SANY and XCMG built massive domestic scale, then moved upmarket against Caterpillar and Komatsu. In electric vehicles, BYD did the same against the German automakers. In machine tools, dozens of Chinese firms built up scale in the middle tier, and then, in 2025, overtook Germany in global exports for the first time. Those are not vague analogies. In excavators, Chinese brands went from a rounding error in the global market to substantial share within about 15 years. In machine tools, China's share of global metalworking exports rose from around 8% in 2016 to roughly 23% in 2025, while Europe's share fell in nearly perfect symmetry. In both cases, the shift was invisible year to year and undeniable by the end of the decade. The playbook does not change. Take the middle of the market. Use domestic scale to fund the climb. Wait for the incumbents cycle to weaken. Move up. Right now, in tractors, the incumbents are unusually weak. And that is when the Chinese playbook has historically worked best. Not by out-engineering the incumbent at their strongest product. By waiting until the incumbent is contracting and then arriving with the mid-range product farmers actually need at a price the incumbent cannot match. Every downturn the West waits out is a window somebody else can walk through. The reason the current tractor cycle matters more than most is that farm equipment is a multi-year purchase. When farmers do finally start buying again, the cycle always turns. Eventually, the machines they choose in 2027 and 2028 will still be on their farms in 2035. Whichever dealer network gets a foot in the door during this downturn does not just sell one tractor. It sells the next tractor, the next combine, and the precision farming subscription that runs on top of them for the next decade. Which brings us to where that door is actually starting to open. The most important sentence in this whole story might be a small one. The P7240, the 240 horsepower tractor built at Weifang, is being prepared for Stage V emissions homologation, with a goal of a full European price list by the end of 2026, and first machines reaching the UK. Read that carefully. 240 horsepower is in the middle of what British and Irish arable farmers buy. It is not a novelty. It is not a compact orchard tractor. It is a serious mid-range field tractor that would compete directly against Deere, New Holland, Case IH, and Fendt on European soil. Chinese tractors have been in Europe before, but almost always at the very bottom of the market. Small horsepower, simple hydraulics, basic cabs, the kind of machine sold to a hobby farmer or a small vineyard, not the kind that shows up during the September combine harvest across the east of England. That is what is changing. Stage V is the technical gate. It is the EU's current emission standard for non-road machinery, and it is one of the strictest in the world. Meeting it requires specific exhaust after treatment engineering, extensive testing, and a certification process that most Chinese exporters have historically not bothered with. A Chinese tractor without Stage V compliance simply cannot be sold new in the European mainstream. Lovol, getting the P7240 through that gate, is what actually opens the door. The commercial gate is service. Farmers who spend 6 figures on a tractor need to know a broken hydraulic pump will not sit unrepaired for a month during planting. Lovol is now building a UK and Ireland dealer network from the ground up, expanding parts and service infrastructure, and lining up the kind of after-sales presence that turns a spec sheet into a purchase. That is not a marketing project. It is a multi-year commitment that has to be visible on the ground before a British arable farmer will even consider putting a Chinese badge machine into the harvest window. Meanwhile, Lovol's export footprint elsewhere has been widening for years. 120 countries, roughly 25% share in Russia, extensive presence across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. The company already had scale as an exporter. What it did not have was a legitimate foothold in the premium Western markets, where Deere and its Western competitors make most of their profits. That is what the P7 240 launch is designed to change. None of this means Deere is about to be dethroned. There is a real gap Lovol has not closed, and it may take a very long time to close. Deere's actual moat is not just tractors. It is the software and precision agriculture ecosystem that runs on top of them. AutoTrack, AutoPath, See and Spray, section control, machine-to-machine data sharing across a farmer's entire fleet. Farmers in North America are buying not just a machine, but a decade-long software relationship. Every year they run a Deere machine, more of their farm's operational data lives inside Deere's system. Field boundaries, seed spacing, yield history, spray records, equipment diagnostics. That relationship is deeply sticky in a way a factory tour cannot fix. Deere has spent the last decade building this ecosystem into an actual product. Its See and Spray system, for example, uses computer vision to identify weeds in real time and hit only the weeds with herbicide instead of the entire field. Farmers using it have reported major reductions in herbicide use. That is not a marketing line. It is a real operating margin improvement, and it is delivered by Deere hardware and Deere software working together in a way no Chinese entrant currently matches. Second, Deere's dealer network is enormous. Roughly 2,000 dealer locations across North America alone, most of them serving farmers whose families have bought Deere for 2 or 3 generations. When a combine breaks down during harvest, the 2-week window that determines whether a farmer profits or loses money that year, the dealer network is what keeps the machine running. Lovol has 380 first-class distributors globally. That is a very different scale of coverage, particularly in the countries where premium prices are actually paid. Third, farmers who buy the biggest machines are extremely conservative buyers. A $500,000 combine or a $400,000 tractor is not a decision anyone makes quickly. Trust is built over decades, and Chinese brands have not yet built that trust at the top of the North American market. None of that means the moat is permanent. 10 years ago, exactly the same arguments were made about the European machine tool industry against Chinese entrants. Those arguments were also true, right up until they were not. The mechanism is the same. Once a Chinese competitor gets enough scale and enough time to iterate, the moat starts to erode from underneath. Every new generation of machine narrows the perceived gap. Every year of reliable service in export markets thickens the dealer network. Every farmer who buys a Chinese mid-range machine and does not regret it makes the next Chinese machine an easier decision. There's also a specific dynamic in the current cycle worth flagging. During a downturn, farmers who normally would not consider a non-Deere machine start comparing spec sheets more carefully. A $200,000 price gap on a 240 horsepower tractor looks very different when net farm income is compressed than when it is at record levels. The exact conditions that force farmers to defer purchases also, over time, force some of them to consider alternatives they would never have looked at during a boom. That is one of the quiet ways cycles reshape market share, not by grand strategy, but by budget spreadsheets. The question in tractors is how long that erosion takes, and whether Deere can hold the frontier long enough to force Lovol to compete as an equal rather than as an insurgent. So consider where the two companies actually sit right now. Deere's biggest division is in the middle of one of the worst equipment cycles in a generation. Its U.S. large tractor market contracted by more than 40% in a single year. AEM's cycle read for high horsepower equipment is at levels not seen since the early 1990s. Deere is being disciplined about it, cutting production, cutting inventory, waiting for the cycle to turn. Lovol, in exactly this window, opened a $420 million smart factory designed to produce more than 100,000 tractors a year, one every 4 minutes, and is now pushing directly into the European mainstream with the most powerful Stage V machine it has ever attempted. The Chinese playbook is not new. Take the market underneath the Incumbents' premium product. Build overwhelming domestic scale. Wait for the Incumbents cycle to weaken. Move up. The reason this matters more than any single ranking or earnings report is that the ag equipment industry, once someone else takes a serious share of it, does not usually give that share back easily. Farmers who buy a Lovol at 240 horsepower in Britain in 2027 are much more likely to buy another Lovol at 300 horsepower in 2033. Every unit sold widens the dealer network. Every dealer network sale reduces the switching cost. Every good harvest run on a Chinese tractor becomes a reference sale to the neighbor over the fence. That is how a market changes hands without a single dramatic moment, not by a Chinese brand suddenly displacing Deere on a single model line, but by 10 years of steady gains at the tier just underneath, until one day the tier just underneath is where most of the volume lives. That is exactly what happened in construction equipment. That is what is currently happening in machine tools. That is what the Lovol strategy is quietly organized around in tractors. 10 years ago, Chinese tractors were largely associated with the lower end of the market. Now the question is whether they can climb into the 200, 300, and eventually 500 horsepower classes dominated by Western brands, and whether Deere and the other Western giants can hold that top of the market long enough to make it a fair fight when they do. If you found this useful, hit the subscribe button. These videos take a lot of research and it genuinely helps the channel. And in the comments, do you think Deere holds the North American premium market? Or does this end the same way construction equipment did? I want to see the split.